So, Michael, tell us the story and the backstory behind this discovery. How does a professor of religious studies come across an ultra-rare piece of American sports history?
Well, I am researching a book, and the tentative title of the book is Religion in Basketball, Naismith's Game. And in researching the book, I have done exhaustive archival research, also oral history interviews, and also standard text research, and on top of all that, actually research on eBay and about auctions in terms of materials that have been floating around, because there are actually a number of items that are in the hands of private collectors. And so I've been researching this, and I came across a reference in a couple different sources to this interview on the specific date. And so we knew that there were actually three different radio interviews we'd identified, and we followed up the leads on the other two, and we reached dead ends. There was the KU radio station and a radio station in Kansas City. The records for both of those stations were lost. So we determined that it had aired on the We the People show, and we started to look around to determine how we could get a hold of some of the programs. There were some old-time radio station websites, but they didn't have complete runs of the episodes. We determined that it looked as though the Library of Congress did, and so then my graduate research assistant then initiated the process with the Library of Congress to identify, locate, verify that it in fact was him, and then, of course, we needed to go through, as I was just mentioning, the legal permission process. And once the legal permissions were gained, then we ordered the copy of the recording from the Library of Congress. They had digitized some of the interview material, and so they made a copy and then made it available to me. And when I asked for it, I asked for permission for educational purposes for my research. But I also asked for copies for the Naismith family, and the permission letter stipulated more broadly in terms of educational research that I was allowed to deliver a copy of the recording to the university archives for them to make available to the public.
1939, right? This is when the interview was conducted?
That's correct. In January of 1939, and he passed away in November of that year.
This is the only known audio recording of Dr. James Naismith at this time, as far as we can tell, right?
That is correct.
What was going through your mind when you heard it for the first time?
It's hard to really say. I had a lot of different thoughts, I suppose, but I was just excited. I was excited that it really was him, and as anyone can listen, anyone can listen to the recording and hear the story that he tells about basketball is a bit different than the standard story. So in this version, he talks about doing a trial run, or as I said in one of the interviews, as if it was a laboratory experiment. He used the classroom as a laboratory. He tested it out, and he realized very quickly that he needed more rules. And, he says in the recording, I realized one of the most important rules I needed was you can't run with the ball. Well, that's rule number 3 as they're written now. So, it's clear that, as he says in the recording, he really went in the first time with very few rules and let them have at it. And it was very rough, as he reports.
Hey, Michael, this is Nick Schwert. About how much time would you say total you spent researching James Naismith, trying to find this audio?
I guess the best way to answer that question is I can say how long the process has taken from when we identified it to when we received it. It's been about a 4-month process.
At any point during that time, did you kind of feel like maybe you were chasing a white rabbit, that you were going to go down all these different avenues and they were all going to be dead ends?
No, when we started, there were 3 that we identified, and 2 were dead ends. So I was hopeful that of the 3, this one was a national show, and We the People was a pretty big deal back in the day. Apparently, this was the show on which the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program was first announced nationally. And so I felt like, this was the best shot we had of all three of them.
It's pretty significant. It's not, in terms of audio, it's not just him testing a microphone. It's him talking about the historic rules of basketball, on which we are going to have on display next to Allen Fieldhouse in a very short amount of time. So the significance of the audio seems to be pretty big.
Yes, I mean, I felt like that it would be significant to find it, and I was proud to find it and wanted to share that and wanted to make it public because I do think that it's significant and important. So yes, I think it's a very exciting find, and I think it adds to our knowledge of Naismith the man. It adds to the whole narrative about the beginning of basketball. And he was someone who of course, he's most remembered for basketball, but as I talk about in a couple of the interviews, I mean, he really was an extraordinary man. And, my book is about the fact that his religious beliefs guided him throughout his life, even including in the invention of basketball. And so he was someone who, as I said, it's really a great American story.
We're talking to Michael Zalgrai, associate professor at the University of Kansas. You mentioned your book, Religion and Basketball, Naismith's Game. What is it about James Naismith that makes him such an interesting subject to you?
Naismith was an individual who began his college career at McGill University in Montreal with the intention of then going on to seminary at Presbyterian Seminary, which is at that time was literally next door to McGill, and becoming a Presbyterian minister. And that's the reason that he went to school. And he decided upon hearing a lecture, in part, he heard a lecture by someone named Amos Alonzo Stagg, who you guys are probably familiar with him, but he was the football coach who held the record for most career victories until it was broken by Bear Bryant. And Stagg was a famous baseball player at Yale who was also a divinity student. Naismith heard Stagg speak at the university and decided that he was already in the seminary at that point. He decided he was going to finish his coursework but not be ordained. Instead, he was going to go down to Springfield and see what they were doing down there because he felt that as they were taught in the language they used at the time, that was a great place to build character in young men. And Naismith, as well as Stagg, and as well as the secretary, the head of the International YMCA Training School, which is now Springfield College, he as well, they were all advocates of something called muscular Christianity. Now, this isn't what they called themselves, but this is what scholars looking back at them have termed this belief system that emphasizes what becomes the motto, actually, of the YMCA, which is a sound mind, a sound body, and a sound spirit.
With regards to the audio that came out, it was announced publicly, I guess today, this morning. What has the response been so far from a Lawrence and KU perspective, but also a national perspective? I know New York Times picked it up and has done a big piece on it, but what has some of the response been since you found it?
Well, let me give a shout-out first to George Diepenbrock, who's sitting right here for KU News Service, because George was the one who contacted the Times. We had already planned to write. He had already planned to write a KU News release, and so that was already in the works. And then he said, once we figured out that the library could go ahead and make it available publicly, he contacted the New York Times, and they were very interested. And so I was interviewed by the Times, and then since it came out this morning, it's been pretty crazy. It's been pretty crazy. It's been very gratifying, and I don't really think that the impact has completely hit me yet. My friends and colleagues are tweeting and texting and emailing me they're seeing it being picked up by various media outlets, and really, it's the local hometown sports guys that are important in this, right? Because but to be serious, a big part of this story is local history, is people in Lawrence and also in Almont, Ontario, and how people just are interested in basketball. They're interested in Naismith, and so there are local historians in both places who have assisted me, and there's what's cool about being in Lawrence is there are still people alive who, have maybe not direct memories of him, but have stories about him that they've heard, from their parents and that sort of a thing. In addition to, there are definitely people who have various items and that sort of a thing, because many of many of the items that are linked to Naismith, are in the hands of private collectors, having been sold in one of a couple of different auctions over, I'd say, the past decade or so.
Well, Michael, I understand it's a very busy day, and we really appreciate you taking some time to talk to us. I'm just curious, when you heard his voice for the first time, were you surprised at all? You had to have had some sort of impression on what you thought he sounded like in all of these months leading up to it. Were you surprised by how he sounded?
No, the best account of his voice said that he had a Scottish brogue. His parents were from Scotland. He grew up in an environment with a lot of people speaking that way, but he had lived in the Midwest. He lived in Lawrence for longer than he lived anywhere else. And as is the case with people, their accents can change based on over time and in where they're living. So he didn't have that pronounced Scottish brogue, but you can tell there's something in his voice. There's some feature to his voice that, as a linguist, I can't recognize or identify specifically, but there was something about his voice. But no, I thought he sounded like a senior citizen from the Midwest. So, and he, as I have said in the in a couple different interviews, I was impressed by his humility. And I was impressed by he's always been described as a very modest man and a very humble man, and that really comes through in the interview.
So, Michael, if someone out there wants to hear the only audio recording of James Naismith's voice, how can they do that?
So it's www.exhibits.lib.ku.edu/interview.
This will take you to the KU archives in a section that now has public access thanks to all the work that you guys have put through and getting the requested permissions and all the allowances to bring it to the archives so that KU alumni and basketball fans from around the world can hear the inventor of basketball. Michael, just got a few moments left. Anything else you'd like to share?
I'm appreciative of all the interest, and I'm glad that we followed through with it, because I was hoping that people would be interested and that people would enjoy hearing it, and it sounds like that's happening. So I'm proud to have been able to discover a piece of his legacy that was lost to history, and to be able to share it with the public.
And your book, Religion in Basketball, Naismith's Game, is that out yet, or is that on the way? What's the timeline on that book?
Still in process, and it's a bit of a ways off, so but still in process.
Yeah, you might have some new material after this story goes out nationwide. You're going to find some more Naismith connections, no doubt.
I think something about this project that I've been surprised about is how that exactly, as you said, has happened. And, really quickly, one more thing. I had the opportunity this summer to travel to Almont, Ontario. I spent a day first in the Canadian National Archives in Ottawa, and then I drove up to Almont, where I was able to spend a couple of days with Jim Naismith, Naismith's grandson, and his wife Beverly, and their daughter Anne. And, it was a terrific experience being able to go around his hometown and visit the museum there and speak to the local historians. And there were photographs and anecdotes that I found there that I wasn't aware of. So it's really been exciting for me, and this project has really gone in directions that I really never expected, and I'm grateful for that.